Today I want to share a book with you that will help you use the decorative stitches on your sewing machine. Hi, I'm Kim Jamison Hurst of Chatterbox Quilts, and today I'm taking a look at Machine Magic. It is 22 Fun Flowers to Sew to get the most from the decorative stitches on your sewing machine. It's by Deborah Louie. Now, you know that we have a lot of decorative stitches on our sewing machines, for the most part. I think I have over 400 on the machine I typically use. And as a quilter, I don't use them all that often, actually. So this book shows me how I can use those decorative stitches when I'm doing fusible web applique, or really any type of applique, but she is using fusible web applique. So let's take a look inside the book and see what she has to share with us. So first off, she's talking about why we should be using these decorative stitches, how we can use the decorative stitches, and she also talks about the edge stitching she does on her fusible web applique pieces. So she does what she calls sketch edge applique. So it's actually free motion quilting just inside the applique piece, and she matches her thread to the fabric. So the point is to get that fabric to stay on the background, but not to see the thread that is doing that for you, because she wants you to enjoy all the decorative stitches you're going to see on the flowers she's using. Now, keep in mind there's flowers in this book, but this technique will work for any type of applique shape, all right? So she tells you what kind of supplies to use, and she goes into threads too, and the differences between threads, and she's also showing you some of the different results when you use different weights of thread, because we don't often think about that as much. When we're piecing, we use just a certain weight, typically a 50 or 60 weight perhaps, but when you are doing decorative stitches, the weight of the thread can make a huge difference on how it looks. So being aware of that right from the start is a good way to begin, and she suggests different brands as well. Then she gets into the flower construction basics, and you can see the different flowers. So they have what she calls stacked flowers. So there's several different pieces all on top of one another. There's different leaves, and then she uses some clamshells as well, sometimes in the border. And so she has names for all these flowers, and that's kind of fun, right? So when she talks about it, she goes, okay, we're going to construct Daisy right now, for example. And what I really appreciate is the fact that she actually has a Kim flower. Okay, so no wonder I like this book, right? Okay. Then she tells you how to build the shape. She goes step by step through everything. There's lots of photos in this book, and I really appreciate the detail she brings to this subject. So she's showing you how she's going to stack those different flowers. And as you can see, you've got these step-by-step instructions. So it's really good visual reference. If you're a visual learner, you're going to love this book. And if you're not a visual learner, well, you're going to love it too, because she explains it at the same time. It's not an IKEA book. Okay, there's more than just the pictures. And then she gives these really good detailed up-close photos when she's actually doing the stitching to show you how you're starting these decorative stitches and how to take a look at them, because they start and they stop, right? A motif in them starts and stops. So she explains how you can find that out, why you want to find that out, because you might want to stop, at the end of an actual closed design rather than partway through and that type of thing. She also talks about pivoting, which is really important when you're using these type of stitches so that it doesn't look strange, okay? If you don't move the project at the right times when you're doing the stitches on the applique pieces, it can look a little bit jarring, okay? So she explains all this. So again, a lot of detail. And then she's going to start talking about learning the stitches on your machine. Now, she talks about making a stitch diary, something I've never done, but a lot of people will talk about this. And the reason for that is that when you look on your sewing machine or even your manual at the different decorative stitches, they can look a lot different there than when they actually stitch out. And of course, they'll look different depending on the weight of thread you use as well. So doing a stitch diary, and you can see some examples here, where she'll tell you what stitch she's using, what width she's using, because you can change the width on some of them, on many of them, what length she may be using as well, to get the look of that particular stitch, to see how it changes and to see what you would like to see with that particular stitch. So for example, if you're looking at this little flower here, you can see here it looks like a little flower. When you start getting small, it looks kind of strange, and when you start stretching it out, it looks like a stretched out flower, so maybe not a look you want. So playing around with these stitches, creating a stitch diary, really good idea if you want to work with decorative stitches on your sewing machine. Another thing that I thought was really interesting is she talks about the blanket stitch. Now, we often talk about finishing the edges of our applique pieces with a blanket stitch. That was a hand stitch that people used to like to do, or still do. But when you're using a blanket stitch on your sewing machine, there's different kinds of blanket stitches. You might not really be aware of it, but if you slow down and take a look and see what your machine is doing when it's making that stitch, you'll see that it'll fall into one of these categories, what she calls a single blanket stitch, a medium, or a heavy. And what it means, it's the number of times that the needle goes back and forth stitching vertically and horizontally. So the next time you're working with your blanket stitch, take a look and see what do you have on your machine. You may have all three on your machine as well, but it's good to know that because it helps to know how the machine's moving, where and when it's taking that stitch, so you'll know when the stitch is finished and you'll know when it's appropriate to pivot as well. So she goes into all that detail. Who would even think about that, right? Okay, then she talks about different kinds of stitches and how to use them. Okay, there's different types of stitches on your machine. You know, for example, if you go from something that's like that flower stitch I showed you to a satin stitch, there's lots of different kinds of decorative satin stitches too. Very different working with those kinds of stitches as well. And by the way, she talks about stabilizer too, because if you're doing decorative stitches, you got to have stabilizer so that your fabric doesn't all scrunch up. There's a lot of thread going into that fabric and needs some help. Then she goes and shows you how to stitch the applique shapes down first. And she goes into great detail with these, and you can see these step-by-step photos. So as she builds this design, she's showing you the different stitches she is using on them as well. So you get an idea of what different stitches will look like on these projects as well. Many of these stitches you probably have on your sewing machine. So she'll show you the way that she adds them on and the order in which she adds them on as well. And of course, I did mention leaves before, so she shows you different leaves. And I really liked this particular diagram here where she's showing you these different leaves, which are, I think there's a couple different kinds of leaves, 2 or 3 different kinds of leaves as far as the applique goes, but lots of different stitches she's used in the center. And I'm thinking, well, that's really interesting because a lot of even our pieced projects may have leaves on them. So, you know, you may have some leaves as extra decoration on them or something if it's a pieced background, let's say. And adding some of these decorative stitches to the leaves can really bring a lot of interest to that quilt. So I like to be able to see some of the stitches she's used there and go, oh, I would not have thought about using that on a leaf, but look at how cool it looks, right? Okay, then she talks about laying out your projects because she has all the different applique shapes in this book and she has some projects in it, but you could certainly make your own projects using those different flower applique pieces that she's got in there, the applique templates. But she's showing you how you're going to mark your fabric, how you're going to arrange all your applique on it. So again, detail, 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 right? And I love all these close-up photos. So you get a really good look at what she is talking about. And, you know, there's a lot of exploring to be done on these photos to see exactly what she's doing, not only with the decorative stitches, but for example, in this case, she's gone around with this free-form stitching that she did with free motion quilting, but she's also added a few little stitches in at each of the little points of that flower. Just a little bit of extra, a little extra touch brings you in and makes you really look at that quilt. She uses vines in here, so she's going to tell you how to make vines to put on, okay, on the bias, of course, so that we can move them around to get to where we want them to be. And she also does this, what she calls keyline stitching. I call this doodle stitching, really, but she's going around the outside edges of the applique pieces with black thread and adding some extra touches in here. You can see some of these tendrils that she's using in there as well. And that just gives some extra dimension to your project as well. It makes those flowers really stand out. She also talks about free motion ditch quilting, what she calls ditch quilting, going around the flowers as well to make them stand out a little bit more, give them a bit of dimension. And then she actually goes into some different background quilting that might be helpful for these types of projects. And I appreciate that because I always like to see some suggestions for how to quilt projects. And in this particular case, there's a lot going on with the applique. So you're not going to have the opportunity to do, for example, cross-hatching. There's not that much background you'll see in some of her projects. But some of these other designs will be able to go in and fit in around those flowers. So I really appreciated that. Then you get into some of the different projects that you can see here. And she's talking about colors as well. Very important to have these some thought going into the colors that you're using or the fabrics you're using, what colors they have in them to make these projects look effective. Because if you just throw anything into them, they're going to be like overwhelming because there's a lot of detail and a lot of flowers in these, as you can see from her projects. And she starts off with some simple projects. Here's a cushion. I talked about those clamshells before. You can see them there as well. I don't know if you can see very well, but I love how she's used these kind of circle decorative stitches to go around the edge of the clamshells. I think that's a perfect stitch to use there. I'm not sure here you can see it a little bit better. So you can see how those go around, like perfect. That's just perfect to edge those clamshells, right? And all the different stitches that are going on in here. So a lot of inspiration in this book for sure. She's going to give you lots of pictures. You can see there's lots of close-ups and full-size pictures so you can see what it's going to look like. She's got a layout there. You can also There's also the full-size patterns at the back of the book that you can, of course, use to use as a layout if you want to. If you want to have a full-size layout, you could certainly do that. Here's another wall hanging. This has little pom-poms on the edge, which is fun, I think. And so you can see what it starts with, and then once you add all the stitching and the applique and the decorative stitches, this is what it's going to look like. Now, I gotta say that for me, some of these are a little too much, maybe, with the flowers on them, like a little too many flowers, too much going on for me in some of them. I can appreciate the artistry in them and everything, and there's a lot to learn from looking at them. But you could certainly take some of these designs and pull out some of the flowers. Don't put as many in, add some extra leaves maybe, or just some more background stitching, and they'd still be very effective. Although I do like this table runner. I think this table runner is beautiful. So she actually has all these different flowers, as I mentioned, at the back of the book. So you can see the different ones here, and you can cut them all out. You can also download and print out the patterns and the full-size layout patterns. She has a link in there that you could download them too. You might have to tape them together if they're printing on 8.5 by 11 pages, but that could give you that whole big layout diagram. But the applique pieces themselves are 100% size in the back of the book. And of course, I always appreciate having templates at 100%, so I don't have to make them any bigger. So if you are wondering what you can do with the decorative stitches on your sewing machine, I would highly recommend Machine Magic by Deborah Louie. Thanks for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up and be sure to share it with your quilting friends. And remember to subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time I release a new video. And before you go, check out these other videos I've included just for you. For more helpful quilting information, please go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.